Good morning, Merry Christmas. I never get tired of saying that. I love that. I love this season. So glad you're here. If you're a guest with us this morning, my name's Jason. I'm the teaching pastor here at Hope, and we're so glad that you have joined us today. We are in week 3, as Jimmy said, of our Advent season, and it's not random. Like, we don't just kind of go, well, here's 4 Sundays, let's just kind of pick what we're going to talk about. Each Sunday has a theme. The first Sunday, the theme was hope. Last week, the theme was preparation, and today the theme is joy. Now, I know that for many of us, Christmas is kind of a mixed bag. We get to this time of year, and for some, you're like Buddy the Elf, and you're just, every day is amazing, right? For some of us, this is kind of our first year going through some major transitions. Maybe we can't be with family this year like we were last year, or maybe this year you experienced the loss of a loved one, and this is going to be the first Christmas season without being able to be together. And this season is supposed to be joy, and you feel like you're supposed to have this kind of welling up of rejoicing in your heart, but you just honestly are just kind of struggling. Well, there's good news in the midst of all this, and I'm very excited about what I think God has to say to us in the midst, or really toward the end, of what has been a very long year. But to do that, I want us to go back and read the passage that Tom and Renee read earlier in Luke chapter 1. And when we do it, here's what I want you to do. I kind of want you to put on your holy imagination. And I want you to not just read this story like maybe you've read it so many times before, but I want you to kind of just sit in the moment and really listen to this conversation between a peasant Jewish girl and her first encounter with an otherworldly divine being. So with that said, Luke chapter 1, starting in verse 26, it says this: In the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to a town in Galilee called Nazareth, to a virgin engaged to a man whose name was Joseph, and to the house, of the house of David. The virgin's name was Mary, and he, it's Gabriel, came to her and said, "Greetings, favored one, the Lord is with you." But she was much perplexed by his words and pondered what sort of greeting this might be. The angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God. And now you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you will name him Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High, and the Lord will give to him the throne of his ancestor David. He will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end." Mary said to the angel, "How can this be since I'm a virgin?" Great question. The angel said to her, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Therefore, the child to be born will be holy. He will be called Son of God. And now your relative Elizabeth, in her old age, has also conceived a son. And this is the 6th month for her who was to be barren. For nothing will be impossible with God." Then Mary said, "Here I am, the servant of the Lord. Let it be with me according to your word." And the angel departed from her. So here we have this very odd exchange between Mary and this angel named Gabriel. Now, a little backstory. Mary, probably around this time, was 14 or 15 years old. So imagine a freshman high school girl. And she was told by this angel that she was going to have a son, even though 1, she wasn't married, 2, had never slept with anybody, and 3, when it comes to just who would be on that list of people you choose, was probably not on the short list of people to give birth to the Son of God. Now, for us, 2 millennia removed from this situation, we kind of look at it and we're like, oh, that's sweet, right? Our nativity scenes are just really nice. Like we drove around last night looking at Christmas lights, and all the manger scenes that we saw, Mary was like smiling, this like holy glow about her, right? But in the midst of this, there were some very life-altering things that were about to take place for Mary. First, there was the issue of logistics. I think Mary was probably, if you're familiar with the Enneagram, I think she was like an Enneagram 5. Right, the angel comes to her and he's like, hey, all this is going to happen. And her first question is, okay, let's talk about how, right? Like, this is not the way I would really expect for this to go down. And I love how straightforward she is with the angel, right? And she's like, I don't know if you know, Mr. Gabriel, how this works, but that's just not possible for me. I mean, how exactly does somebody who is a virgin become pregnant? And not just with any baby, but the Son of God. Right? That kind of seems like a big hurdle to cross there. And the angel responds very simply, well, here's how it works, Mary. The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Therefore, the child to be born will be holy, and he'll be called the Son of God. Thanks. That brings a lot of clarity. I love the words that are there. Actually, the word that for power that's used there is the word dynamis, which is where we get our word dynamite. And then that phrase of overshadowing is actually literally like a cloud. So this cloud of dynamite power is going to come upon you. That would not give me comfort. That would make me scared to death, right? When is this happening? How is this happening, right? But then you have not just the issue of logistics, you have the issue, and I think this is probably a bigger one, and it's the issue of culture. See, being pregnant in first century Israel without being married was pretty much a death sentence for a woman. The religious and cultural laws demanded, at the very least, she be removed from society, which then would restrict her ability to feed her family, care for her kids. She couldn't really care for the infant. At the very least, and at the very most, she'd probably be stoned because it was just considered immoral and not right. At some point, she was going to have to tell her parents. Can you imagine how that conversation went down? Dad, I know what it looks like. Okay, it's probably not what you're thinking. Just the awkwardness, the difficulty there. Then we find out she has to tell her fiancé, and he was planning for divorce. He's like, this is just too much, Mary. I can't do this. Now, needless to say, while most pregnancies are filled with excitement and filled with joy and filled with happy occasions with your family, baby showers, celebrations, this one from the outset, because of this conversation, we know is going to be filled with stress, anxiety, worry, fear. Because when you're removed from society, life instantly becomes difficult. And with the added stress of the social and the religious implications, it would have made Mary's pregnancy what OBGYNs call a very high-risk pregnancy. Higher blood pressure, potential preeclampsia, and or premature delivery. And then the question is, if you're removed from society, how do you deliver a baby? I mean, if there's no community, there's no midwife. It's just you by yourself. This news had the potential to completely unravel everything that Mary had built. Her mental health, her emotional health, her physical health. At this point, it just is all in jeopardy. But look at her response, verse 38. After hearing this, it says that Mary said, "Here I am, the servant of the Lord. Let it be with me according to your word." For many of us in this room, the past year and the circumstances in this past year are nothing short than life-altering. I mean, you've got the tornado in March, followed by COVID and quarantine, the racial and social issues in our country, the election. All of these things have created a cacophony of life-altering events that have the potential to create chaos and a perceived lack of joy in our previously stable and, quote, normal lives. And one of the greatest mistakes I think that we make, especially as followers of Jesus, is that we often confuse joy with happiness. We think joy should be filled with all the good feelings of pleasure, excitement. And what I have to ask myself is, if that is true, then what happens when my circumstances change? What happens when that season of joy is over? When the relationship ends, when whatever made me happy no longer makes me happy? You see, if the pleasure that we derive from life is based on our circumstances, then we're going to constantly be on a roller coaster of emotion, experiencing incredible highs and very low lows. And when we don't feel the high, we chase it, right? It's like that line that you draw. You're like, if I only had this thing, then I would be happy. And we keep chasing that line, but the line seems to keep moving. It's like a game of cat and mouse. You can never really win. And I know this, I'm an Enneagram 7. Like, we don't like sadness. We don't like uncomfortability. And this year has been very uncomfortable. But I think about Mary's situation. I mean, think about this for a second. If the course of her life and her ability to be truly filled with joy and have mental health and emotional stability, if that had been based on her circumstances, this story, I think, would have ended very differently. Who knows what would have happened next? Which means that our joy has to be based on something else. And here's the core. Here's the kicker. Ready? True and lasting joy is not based on circumstance, but on salvation. Let me say it again. True and lasting joy is not based on our circumstances, but it is based out of salvation. You see, circumstances are based on a perceived reality of the world around us. What we can feel, what we can touch, what we can taste, like our senses kind of create that sense of circumstance. And salvation is born out of God stepping into that world and changing our reality, breathing life into places that were dead or forgotten. I think sometimes what happens is when we think about salvation, especially if you grew up in the church, many times we connect salvation immediately and only to the idea of rescue or forgiveness of sin. And that is true. Like, we do need rescue from sin. We do need that forgiveness. But it's more than that. Salvation is from all things that seek to destroy us. Famine, disease, natural disasters, COVID. It is a past, a present, and a future reality. Paul says it this way. He says that we are saved, we have been saved, and we are in the process of being saved. And I think that out of that process, joy is formed. I love the way C.S. Lewis says it. He says that joy requires cultivation. It requires work. It doesn't just happen. Now, I have an illustration here, hopefully that can help you think through this. Imagine, like this right here, you've got a pitcher of water. And this, in a sense, represents kind of like your water level of joy. And right now, you're like at an 8 or maybe a 9 out of 10. You're doing really, really good. But what ends up happening is that over time, you're like, man, I've got to give something to my spouse, right? And you know, my kids, they kind of require a lot. And so I need to kind of pour myself out for them. And in the midst of that, too, you're like, well, I have work obligations, so I've got to pour myself out for my work and my job. There's deadlines, and there's things there that I got to work through that are difficult. And then you're like, man, yeah, but I'm a follower of Jesus, so I got to do that, too. And so I'm going to just kind of keep pouring what I've got and pour, and then I'll give whatever I have, but then it's not as much as the others, and you discover that you're just completely empty. And you maybe have some trickle of joy or something coming out, but a large part of it is gone. Maybe this is where you are today. Maybe this is where you are in this season. You feel like you've been pouring out, you've been giving, and work life, and family life, and school life, and all of these things are demanding so much of you. And then you add on top of that you're supposed to have this really deep-seated joy in this season called Christmas, and you're like, I've got nothing. I'm just empty, trying to make it. I firmly believe that every single person is created with an incredible capacity for immense joy. We are created to have this thing filled to the brim and overflowing. But the water level rises and falls over time, depending on how much we cultivate that in our lives. I want you to do something with me for a second, okay? If you can and you're comfortable, I'd like for you just to close your eyes. I'm going to ask you a question. Just take a deep breath in and breathe out and answer this question. Right now, in this moment, sitting in this room, where would you say is the water level of your joy? Is it high? Is it overflowing? Or is it down? Are you just kind of running on empty? Where is that water level? Now look up here for a second. I'm not trying to discourage you. I'm not trying to make you feel worse. I actually want to give you some hope in this moment. Because I think that there are 4 things we can do as a people who are apprentices of Jesus to help us cultivate that joy in our life. Are you ready? Okay. Number 1, remember the promises of God. Remember the promises of God. In the spring, actually in January, we're going to start reading through the Bible in a year. And you're like, man, that sounds very daunting, very overwhelming, but I'm telling you, like, as we go through this, you're going to see these promises come forward. And if you're not sure what they are, here's 4 right now out of the gate. Let me just give to you. Number 1, Joshua 1:9. It says, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Promise number 2, Isaiah 41:10. I love this. It says, do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Promise number 3, Psalm 32:8. I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you with my loving eye on you. And here's another one. I love this. Matthew chapter 11. This is Jesus, our rabbi, speaking. He says, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. We've got to cultivate and remember the promises of God. And as we do, that water level will begin to rise. Here's number 2, something you can do. Let me just, out of the gate, this is a very practical thing. Practice gratitude. Practice gratitude. I mean, the research on the link between gratitude and physical, emotional, and mental health are astounding. I mean, studies show that those who practice gratitude are generally more healthy overall and experience less aches and pains. And one study said that if you actually get a journal out or a whiteboard or something and you write down 3 to 5 things that you're grateful for before you go to bed, you're actually going to have a better night's sleep. Those of you with kids, who doesn't want a better night's sleep, right? Practice gratitude. It completely begins to change your whole disposition. And that water level begins to rise. Number 3, get connected to community. You know, sometimes when we're burned out and we're poured out, what happens is we begin to feel like we actually can't do anything for anybody else or with anybody else. And we just want to kind of hole up, put on our PJs, put on some Hallmark, and shut the world out. And while there may be a season for that, if that is your everyday reality, you will slowly and eventually become isolated, lonely, depressed, bitter, so on and so forth. You and I were made for community. And when we are in community, that's when we begin to experience that water level of joy rising. The last one, this is one I'm going to ask for some help on, is very simple, although it's probably the most awkward. And it's simply this: sing. Again, the research on this is astounding. But when you sing, something begins to increase that water level in your soul. Sometimes that's all you can do is sing. And that's exactly what we see Mary do in this passage, because it doesn't stop at verse 38. No, it keeps going. Mary, after she meets her cousin Elizabeth and hears that she's pregnant too, breaks out into song, and this is what she has to say.